How do rivers dry up and how that relates to our organ meridians, our health and well-being, and of course our Qigong practice. That is going to be the topic of this episode of Qi Life. So I always find it really interesting when I come across clear examples in nature of the principles that we work with in Qigong. Of course, within Qigong, we draw so much of our inspiration, so much of our understanding of how our energy flows from what we find in nature. The same patterns that are in nature also occur within us. Many of these patterns that we're interested in and that we refer to a lot to understand our energy flow within us relate to the way that water flows within the natural environment around us. Water is an amazing conductor of energy in so many ways. I won't get into too many of the details of that, but this is why those same patterns we see very clearly within us. Now, one of those patterns of flow of water and energy that we find within us is the pattern of the flow of rivers. And we see that within our bodies as the organ meridians. The organ meridians form a fairly complex or sophisticated network of energy flows through our body that brings that living energy to every part of our body. And they're connected to reservoirs of energy, being the organs. This is like a river being connected to a lake. And eventually those rivers flow into the oceans. So those are the dantians from a Chinese medicine or Qigong terminology point of view. So if you've followed the channel for a while, you will have heard me talk about these principles previously. And one of the vlogs from quite some time ago, it's probably a couple of years ago, maybe even longer, was when I was living in New Zealand at the time. And the area that I was in had quite a lot of flooding, and there was a river there that flooded. And then afterwards I went and I made a vlog showing some parts of the river and how this had changed because of the flooding, and how some parts were now blocked up, and how the water was flowing through partially in some areas, and in other places it had become quite stagnant, and so on. And this pattern very much is reflected in some of the patterns we can find within us sometimes of how our energy flow can sometimes be disrupted. Different things can stop it from flowing as freely as we would like. Now here I have a different example of a dysfunction of energy flow within a river, which again will connect to what happens in our meridians as well. I am by the river Cijevna here, and specifically I'm at a place called Niagara. Now, Niagara, that's the local way in the local language of saying Niagara. There's a Niagara that probably more people are familiar with, of course, on the border between Canada and the US, which is a very famous waterfall. Now, an enterprising restaurant owner, and I'm going to show some little shots I've taken of the restaurant, had his restaurant by, or I think it's a family, so they had their restaurant by the river here, and they decided that they'd turn it into a bit of an attraction by actually building their own dam on the river. And this dam, it ensures that the water level stays reasonably high all the way through summer, and so it made it a nice place to sit in their restaurant by the river, by the water there. And also people would come and they would swim because there was a nice deep swimming hole because of this dam. And then on the other side of the dam, when the river was high enough, which is most of the year, they would have this waterfall. And so they called their restaurant Niagara, and the whole little area is called Niagara. Great for swimming, great for the restaurant, great for just walking and enjoying the river. So it's a couple of months ago now, quite soon after I arrived in Montenegro this year, I came out to Niagara, to the restaurant, to have lunch and also to swim in the river, and was really surprised to find, as you've already seen in some of the shots, that there was no water here. None at all. Completely dried up, all the way up and down the river, and you can see that in the shots that I'm showing you now. And so we asked the waiter, like, what's happened here? Why is there no water? It was like, it was hot, it was quite dry, but there had been some rain maybe I don't remember exactly, but a couple of weeks ago. And even when it's dry, relatively speaking, the dam kept the water levels high normally. And it was completely dry now. So we wondered what had gone on. The waiter told us that actually quite some distance up the river, across the border in Albania, they had diverted all of this water for some kind of, I think it's for a hydropower project. Anyway, they diverted all the water and now this river is completely dry. Yesterday, or during the night, it rained quite heavily, and you can tell that from the puddles that are in some of the rocks around the river, but the river itself is still completely dry. It's a real shame in many ways, because it was a lovely place to come to. But I thought it was interesting also just as an example of the kind of dysfunction that we can sometimes find within our own energy flows. Sometimes people get this idea, you know, they see meridians and other aspects of our energy system and it's just drawn on a chart of some sort, and they just go like, well, it must be there because the chart says it is, right? The truth isn't that simple, because lots of things can actually affect those energy flows. Some of them are subtle, you know, things that block the energy flow up, make it a little bit stagnant and so on. Others can be quite major, like this one, where a diversion has actually completely dried this particular pathway of water flow, this river up. Now, in our bodies, that could be something like a major physical trauma or a surgery or something like that that could affect things so much that it actually completely disrupts the energy flow. Most of the time that doesn't happen. Most of the time our systems are self-correcting. They find a way to, you know, get themselves back on track when there is a disruption, and I've talked about that in previous vlogs as well. But sometimes we can, you know, we can have entire sections of meridians that have dried up. The energy is not flowing through them. So yeah, I thought this was an interesting example of some of those patterns we find. Now, some of the differences we find in our energy flow can be quite different as well, and this is more down to each of us being individuals. We're all different from each other. The charts are just charts, they're maps, and they're general maps. They're not maps of each of us as individuals. Sometimes we find that some things are just a little bit in a different location or something like that because our bodies are different, our personalities, our spirit that drives our flow of energy is different, and that affects things as well. And this is why within our Qigong practice, particularly if we're getting deeper into our Qigong practice, and particularly if we are wanting to start to apply the skill with energy that we develop in our Qigong practice in practical ways. Now, one of the really key practical ways that we can apply that skill with energy is in healing. In order to do that well, we need to start to develop the ability to perceive those flows directly for ourselves, not relying on the charts. Because if we just rely on the charts, then we might be working with something that's not actually there, or it's not in quite the right location. When we develop our own perception, we're able to find what's really going on there and therefore work with it more effectively. And that can be, again, often minor little differences, but sometimes something quite major. And we might find like, oh, the energy has been diverted here. Do we need to re-divert it back in to create a healthy energy flow? Or is there some other way that things need to be adapted to create health and balance to as great an extent as we can, of course, within our individual circumstances? Now, like I mentioned, it is a shame that this river is dried up now. Really quite a bummer for the owners of the restaurant, because it was a big part of the attraction here. But it's still a very nice restaurant. I'll show some shots of that as well. They're themed very much around, I guess, sort of old style Montenegrin ways of doing things. They do a lot of grilled meat. They have a lot of sort of traditional style decoration and furniture. They've got 3 indoor seating areas. They've got a couple of outdoor seating areas, which were next to the river, but are still very nice to come and visit. So it's still a great place to come, but you know, it's missing some of its attraction now. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting, maybe useful, maybe gives you some insight into your understanding of your own Qigong practice and maybe how you can deepen that. I look forward to seeing you on another vlog soon.